Good morning, Wabash. Speaking today at Pioneer Chapel will be Peter Wright, class of '81, with his talk titled Into the Arena, a series of unplanned events. Peter is a longtime environmental lawyer and leader. He served as a senior Senate confirmed official at EPA in the last administration, but most of his career he has served as an in-house environmental lawyer at 2 large chemical companies, and he has also worked for 3 different law firms. Peter graduated from Wabash in 1981 as a religion major. He also graduated from what is now the McKinney School of Law in 1986. Peter has been a class agent for over 15 years, and he has served as the co-chair of the Society of Class Agents and on the board of the National Association of Wabash Men. He has been the president of Lambda Chi Alumni Association and has served on its board for many years. He just turned over the presidency of the Wabash Alumni Association of the Greater District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia. Let's give a warm welcome to Peter.
Well, good morning, Wabash. It's great to be back here with all of you. It's certainly an honor and privilege to be able to participate in this chapel talk. Regular chapel talks were not something that took place 4 decades ago when I was here, so it's great to see that Wabash has brought this tradition back, and it does so well. As Caden knows, I had a little bit of difficulty, weather-related, getting over here yesterday from Washington. But I would say this, that the 5-hour delay in the Reagan Airport was nothing compared to what happened to me 45 years ago when I was a freshman at Wabash on that very day. And that was, Wabash was playing Butler in basketball, and the weather was bad when we drove down. I drove down with the team. The weather was so bad I came back with a pep band. You know how long it takes to get to and from Indianapolis. The drive took 4 hours to get back. It was horrific. We had to have the guy in the passenger seat look out to see where I-74 was. We only went off the road once, and we were very lucky to get back. So I guess all things considered, it's great to be here, and I have no complaints about yesterday's weather and delays. So the talk today is Into the Arena, a series of unplanned events. With apologies to Lemony Snicket, whether you consider these events to be fortunate or unfortunate, I'll leave you to be the judge. You know, listening to many other chapel talks, many of them are inspiring. You might consider this a little bit more of a warning. So, you know, a frequent icebreaker, at Wabash is the question about, well, how did you come to go to Wabash? So let me just tell you briefly how I made my way to Wabash. I heard about Wabash from a gentleman, Ed Bingham, who was the director of development of the high school, the prep school I attended in Los Angeles. He taught a class to seniors on the Harvard Business School problem-solving method. He was a graduate. It led him to a very successful career on Wall Street that basically allowed him to retire at 40 and take a job at my high school. He was reconnecting with his Indianapolis roots, got engaged to his high school sweetheart, who happened to be the daughter of Barney Hollett. Barney Hollett at the time was a lawyer at Baker & Daniels, and most importantly for our story, today was the president of board of trustees of Wabash. So future father-in-law says to future son-in-law, well, you work in a high school in California, surely you can get somebody to come and visit. So Ed told me about Wabash, all male in Indiana in Crawfordsville. So of course I immediately said I wasn't interested. But luckily, he was smarter than I was, and he called my parents and said he knew that I was accepted and interested in Carleton, which is outside of Minneapolis, and that I really ought to go visit. So notwithstanding my total lack of interest, I was put on a plane to go to visit Carleton and then Wabash. And I came at a time that you wouldn't think would be a very good time to visit. I came between finals and commencement, so I didn't have a chance to meet any students, but I did meet the president of the college, Thaddeus Seymour. And what I'd heard about Thaddeus Seymour was that he spent more time with the students and the faculty, so consequently he was very popular with the students and the alumni, not so much with the faculty. He talked to me for 20 minutes, I was sold. My short form of the story is it must have been karma, since it seemed so improbable. Unfortunately, well, maybe fortunately for him, President Seymour left after my freshman year to go to work at Rollins College. But after this, sort of impulsive and unexpected decision to attend Wabash, for the most part, I was a very typical Wabash student with the one thing that no longer is an oddity. In the entire time I was here, I was the only student from California. So I'm really glad that Wabash now does a great job recruiting, and that's no longer anything unusual. So when I came to Wabash, I planned to be a history major. But one thing that sort of started setting me off that track is I took a class in the history of Christianity. You could credit it towards a history major or a religion major. Eric Dean, who was then the head of the religion department, said, well, just a couple more courses and that could be a minor. And, then a couple more courses and that could be a major. And as looking out and knowing that a number of you have just fairly recently finished comps, the thing that prevented me from being a double major in history and religion was the thought about double comps. I thought, since a lot of my history credits were AP classes, I didn't think it was going to work out so well to have to take comps and study high school notes. So in the end, I became only a religion major. But between my high school AP credits, and then I also took a couple classes at Cornell between my junior and senior year, I actually had enough credits to graduate a year early from Wabash, a fact that I never mentioned to my parents while I was here. But why rush through the fleeting years and graduate too early? When I graduated, or before I graduated, I flirted with the idea of going to graduate school, inspired by Professor Dean, Ray Williams, Hal Peebles, and Bill Plaker. In the history of Wabash College at some point, the sports analogy is that they'll be considered the murderer's row of the religion department. And because of the inspiration from them, I went to the University of Chicago, to interview at the grad school. And, I raised the issue that, it had the reputation that students would go there and just be a grad student for a very long time. They said, well, we have an answer for that. We have an accelerated program, the Master of Religious Studies. And I thought about it, and I thought, I don't think I really want to go to graduate school so I can associate an MRS with my name. But, more seriously, what I did is I thought, I'm not in the league with these incredible professors, and then I had this fear that if I went to graduate school that I would end up having to go to some lesser college, basically teaching Sunday school to college kids. Reflecting back, that's poor decision-making, to compare myself to others and imagining some terrible future. So, my intuition there let me down. But like many Wabash students, many Wabash students, after a couple of years, after I graduated, long enough to become an Indiana resident, I went to law school in Indianapolis before it was associated with the name of a donor. I was pretty good at civil procedure, and my civil procedure professor had been a clerk on the Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, so we had invited the judge that he had worked for to come to the law school and speak, and he made a point of introducing him to me. I maybe had kind of an inkling he was thinking that maybe I ought to apply for a clerkship, but again, another mistake that I made, I thought, well, I'd been out of law school for a couple of years. I really needed to get practicing, so I never really applied. And looking back, clearly, whether I would have had that opportunity, I don't know, but I certainly foreclosed a potentially prestigious opportunity. My full expectation is after I graduated, well, actually before I graduated from law school, I clerked for the law firm of Baker & Daniels, and I was a second-year summer associate. And as the way things worked in those days, they gave you a job offer at the end of the year, fully expecting you said you'd think about it, and I said, I'll take it. I'll work for you. I thought I'd accepted the last job I was ever going to have. I just worked there for my whole career in Indianapolis. Well, it turns out, obviously, I missed that by a mile. And then I thought, well, okay, I'll work for the firm and probably do something litigation-related because I like civil procedure. But I was sort of open to other things, and I got assigned to the environmental group. Nothing that I ever studied in law school. I was even kind of skeptical about it because it was new enough and there really weren't any, or not many in the way of case law decisions. But as it turned out, I really enjoyed it. And in that case, I did make a good decision by being open to an opportunity and following that path. And while I very much enjoyed the company of my colleagues and particularly enjoyed the new and developing area of environmental law, before too terribly long, I decided to look for an opportunity to work for a corporation and to move out of Indiana, thinking that, well, I could always move back. For most of my career, I have been, as the introduction indicated, an in-house environmental lawyer. So while I can say that as an in-house environmental lawyer in St. Louis for the Monsanto Company and then in Midland, Michigan for the Dow Chemical Company, I worked for many high-profile matters. As an in-house lawyer, my profile was not very high. Typically, in-house lawyers don't sign pleadings. They're hardly ever used as a spokesperson, for a company with the media. And when you speak at professional events, you always make a real point of saying that the opinions you're expressing are your own because, and not to be attributed to the fact that you only have one client, realizing, of course, that people will attribute whatever you have to say to your client. So actually, that was probably pretty good training. But, the other thing I've often told other young lawyers and law students is one of the things about being an in-house counsel is some of your most significant achievements have these features. It's something that never happened, something almost nobody knows about, and 3, because of confidentiality, you can't tell anybody about it. So again, we're talking about a very low profile. The world of environmental law, at least initially and still principally, is a creation of statutes and environmental and regulations. So as a consequence, there's obviously a lot of involvement with particularly career government officials, but occasionally elected government officials as well. And my natural inclination, though, was to try to minimize my interaction with elected officials and kind of leave that to others. But that being said, even with my natural inclination, there were meetings on matters that I was involved with that I guess were of significance. That, for example, maybe the governor came to the meeting. I have one little episode to report on. There was a time I got asked to brief a state legislator about a piece of legislation that he was going to propose that he thought would be helpful to the company. I was very reluctant to do that, but I agreed. And I thought I was very diplomatic in explaining to him why what he was proposing would not work as he intended. Well, I heard about that a few hours later. After work, I was golfing in the Accountants Golf League, and I got a call, and I answered it on the golf course. And I was told that the state legislator had called the client, my company, my clients back and said I should be fired. So I promptly then, after getting off the phone, I promptly proceeded to hit a slice into a very small creek that had never previously come into play for me before. I was right that even though the legislation was never adopted, it did spectacularly backfire. But my lesson to all of you there is don't take a call on the golf course. But just before we get to the part of the story that is the reason I think I was invited here today, I'll introduce a theme, and a theme that you've probably heard about from other speakers, and that is that I think Wabash prepares you to be ready for anything. So to relate back to my story about broadcasting, I got my start in radio broadcasting, sports broadcasting here at Wabash. One Saturday when a fraternity brother said to me, he said, hey, Pete, we have a keg here today. Why don't you go over to the football game and broadcast it with JV? This is 15 minutes before the game started, and it was like, well, okay. And I'll apologize. This was in the days before the underage drinking problem was solved by not allowing fraternities to have kegs. So I was pretty nervous about it. I really wasn't prepped, but I thought, okay, I'll do it. And that was a very good decision to just sort of jump in. And, I became the sports information director, or the sports director at the radio station, and had the opportunity to broadcast football and basketball during some really glory times for both of those sports here at Wabash. And then also recall that I was a religion major, and having worked as an environmental lawyer. Well, all the time I was at the chemical company, almost all my clients were engineers. And for a while, they'd always think it was kind of funny that, I was a religion major, not some sort of a science major. But as it turned out, that never really was an impediment, and frankly, sometimes actually quite a benefit. The other thing that makes me think about it, the value of your Wabash education, is at my 25th reunion here at Big Bash, was talking to a fraternity brother, Dave Steiner, who, while we were here, was a very good English major. But at the dinner, he was telling me that he actually worked as an environmental consultant in Indianapolis, that he had actually had to go back to school to get a master's in science. So I asked Dave, I said, do any of your colleagues ask you to edit their paper, their writings? And he said, yeah, they do that a lot. And I thought, yeah, I know that they do it, because having read innumerable numbers of reports from environmental engineers and environmental consultants, it's pretty frequent that a lot of them don't write very well. So Dave was quite an asset to his colleagues and his firm. So now on to the interesting part. Was I really ready for anything? And I'll talk a little bit about the United States Senate's process for advising and consenting on nominees. It's also actually the title of a very good movie that I commend to your attention, that I invited the Wabash interns who were in DC last summer to watch it at my home. So this whole process for me to become a Senate-confirmed official started with a call out of the blue. Well, on my birthday in September of 2017. And actually, the whole thing is a little bit of a setup. It wasn't totally out of the blue. I did hear that I might be getting this call. And actually, the call came to me while I was driving home, and I was driving home at a particular time because my wife knew to call me at work to say I needed to get home because my daughter had driven home from Michigan State to surprise me for my birthday, and I better not be late. So the actual call I had with the EPA Chief of Staff about the role of the Assistant Administrator for the Office of Land and Emergency Management, OLEM, everything is an acronym, actually took place the next day because I had to get home for my birthday celebration. So again, this is pretty obscure for most people. This is the office that oversees the Superfund program, hazardous waste regulation, and a number of other things. And when I thought about the opportunity to serve, I remembered again a Wabash Big Batch speech that I heard from one of our most distinguished living graduates, David Kendall, where he talked about how the administrative agencies of the federal government are effectively the fourth branch of the government. And I thought how true and accurate, even though you never heard that in your civics classes. I never considered that I'd be a candidate for this position, but obviously one of the things that occurred before that is somebody got elected to president of the United States, but most people didn't think was ever probably going to be president. So this somewhat of a surprise election meant that there weren't all sorts of candidates lined up for these government appointment jobs, and it was also the fact that many people had eliminated themselves from consideration from their comments in the media and social media. My lack of partisan postings and just my general tendency not to share a lot of opinions prevented me from being disqualified. Having never aspired to the role, I was completely unaware of the confirmation process that I was about to learn about by doing it. The preparatory paperwork was unbelievably extensive, and so practically speaking, I really couldn't be nominated, my nomination couldn't go to the Senate Environmental and Public Works Committee until 2018. But of course, I knew about it, my employers knew about it, other close friends knew about it, and I kept waiting for that announcement to go out, and periodically I could call, oh, it's gonna happen today, and it never happened. And so of course, what happened on a Friday in March, when I was told, no, it's not gonna happen today because all the offices in Washington, D.C., all the federal government offices, they're closed due to high winds. I'm sitting in a meeting, and I get a text from a fraternity brother, Josh Bleach, class of 16, who was in law school. He said, I saw on Twitter that you just got nominated. I guess I should have thought, maybe it's appropriate for the last administration that I would actually get the notification via Twitter. Apparently, this Friday in March, it was a very slow news cycle. My nomination for what is a fairly obscure position was picked up so widely, it's hard to comprehend. The Sierra Club president of New Jersey issued a press statement saying, even for this president, this is his worst nominee. This is somebody I never met, I never worked with, ever dealt with the Sierra Club of New Jersey or any other branch of the Sierra Club. This got picked up in all sorts of places that you would never think my nomination would be of interest. It was in Teen Vogue. While we were heading out on spring break, I got a call from a German cousin I'd never met. He read about it in Der Spiegel. I mean, it's... So in any case, the preparation for the Senate confirmation hearing before the Environmental and Public Works Committee was fascinating. In the past, it had been customary to be introduced at a confirmation hearing from the senators of your home state. which would, in that case, would have been Michigan. Well, apparently and unfortunately, this is one of a number of Senate customs that is no longer in place, notwithstanding the fact that the two senators from Michigan apparently had a pretty good relationship with the Dow Chemical Company. But that's being what it is. So let's jump forward to the Senate confirmation hearing. And again, I'll go back to a theme. Think of comps, right? And that half of the senators at that hearing are kind of like the professors in your major. They want you to do well. Now here's where it differs. The other half wants you to catch fire and burn into a pile of ashes. Part of my preparation for this was watching recordings of other confirmation hearings. I did see one where an unsuccessful nominee who she alternatively seemed to be going up in flames and then otherwise be drowning. It was painful to watch, so that was part of my preparation. Fortunately, EPA's Congressional Affairs Office did a great job of preparing me for the hearing. What they do is they run you through what in Washington, D.C. are called murder boards, where your colleagues act as in the role of particular senators on the hearing and propound you with questions, difficult questions, a lot of questions. So in the actual hearing, the toughest questions that I received were from Senator Cory Booker. Now, we started off friendly enough, made a kind of humorous remark about liking my haircut, and then he proceeded to bore into me with a whole series of questions, completely ignoring my colleague who was also going through the confirmation process at the same hearing, like he wasn't there. But fortunately, my preparation was so good that the actual hearing was not nearly as hard as some of the prep sessions. And while I had a hearing in June of 2018, it was not until July of 2019 that I was finally confirmed. Apparently, one thing for the political science folks out there is the elimination of the filibuster for nominees apparently has had the effect of reducing the number of deals that get made to get nominees through the process. And of course, we all know about how bitter partisan politics are these days. Well, the role of the assistant administrator was fascinating, totally engaging, frustrating, exhilarating, and exhausting. It's a role that provided me with the opportunity every day, all day, to work on important matters. But I'm going to spare you all the details because 99% of you really wouldn't be all that interested in them. But one thing, I often think of a quote that kind of crystallizes like just the intensity of every day, and that I came to appreciate very much. And it's from Douglas Adams, the author of A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Time is an illusion, and lunchtime doubly so. So again, I think maybe I'm painting a picture that it's all not triumph, success, and accolades to enter the public arena. Now, while I do not regret taking the role, and I'll say something later about regret, there were costs. I went from being a pretty private person, albeit to a very minor public one. I was warned that my name might appear in the New York Times. That was a little off. On the front page, on the left-hand side of the Sunday New York Times, for July 29, 2018, I was the subject of a news story that, as my fraternity brother Greg Castania said, oh, that was above the fold. The online version of that same story was colorized in a kind of a sickening yellow color, and it showed a photo of me. Another fraternity brother from the class of 2016, Marcus Camerath, said, it made me look like a Marvel supervillain. So other things is, the cost of living in Washington, D.C. would be considerably more than living in Midland, Michigan. My congressionally limited salary was 60% less than I previously was making. But I would suggest that these things are predictable and of no consequence. A consequence is that apparently I was unfriended by a very close friend and Wabash classmate, apparently for having served the American people in the administration. That's something, is a cost you can't calculate, and I would not have anticipated. But now on to the important part. I know it's not, that I knew I wasn't the first choice for this appointment. Humbling, or I could have been upset. It would have been easy to take a pass. It was never a goal of mine to serve in this capacity. I never really put myself out to serve. I was sort of accepting of the fact that, I would be a ticket holder in the stands who occasionally got a very good seat. But my response, in my response to give up my relative anonymity and comfort was informed by more principles than it was my ambition. And I say this, my experience at Wabash helped me make the decision to jump in. I approached the opportunity with great ignorance of the process, unaware of the many costs, but also with that sort of sense of confidence that comes through living a life as a Wabash graduate who was not specifically prepared for a particular career, but managed to succeed in tasks and roles that he never contemplated. During what seemed like the long period of time that I was waiting to be confirmed, I began reading Ryan Holiday's The Daily Stoic, which I commend to you, as the wisdom of the Stoic philosophers seemed to be appropriate and grounding for one in public life. The Stoic recommendation of not having too many opinions is something that I followed even before I knew it was a Stoic virtue. There's no need to frequently demonstrate that you're wrong or do not understand something. Having fewer opinions, I think, helps to guard you against confirmation bias and also the risks, other tricks of your mind that will inhibit your ability to learn, understand, and be of service. Serving on the inside of administration heightened my understanding and appreciation for how uninformed many people are about many things. The lack of understanding and experience and knowledge is unfortunately something that doesn't actually constrain a lot of people from having a lot of opinions. Political administrations, by their nature, pay a lot of attention to reporting. And I have no intention to wade into the debate about bias in the media. My concern more is competence. Many people read and watch and listen to things thinking they're getting some sort of, if you will, nutritious food, but really what they're receiving is a sweet and salty snack designed for particular political culture or social palates. My advice to you is that if there's something, and to take advantage of your Wabash education and connections, if there's a topic that is of real interest to you, I recommend that you reach out to a Wabash alumnus who actually knows about the particular topic and ask him about the topic. As the investment fund manager and writer Ray Diallo talks about getting advice, go and talk to people who are believable, not necessarily people you already think you believe in. The harsh maelstrom of criticism and that accompanies now the public service is no doubt something that dissuades many people from serving. And so what I'd like to leave you with is just a couple of thoughts, but first a quotation that hung on the wall of my office. I think it's a very nice office, very big, biggest office that I would ever have. And this is a quotation from President Teddy Roosevelt, and it's called "The Man in the Arena." "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows, in the end, the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." Wabash prepares you to step into the arena, even if you have some concerns about being ready. Despite all the negative aspects that I may have highlighted, all the warnings I've provided about public service, my plea is that you consider accepting that opportunity if it presented. And even when you're on the sidelines and in the stands, you can both support and hold accountable those men and women who are in the public arena. I expect that you cannot simply wish for things to be better. Be ready to serve, be ready to support. You cannot have high expectations for yourself and that live by low standards. You may already know better, bitter the taste of regret, because even during your time at Wabash, you passed on that opportunity to take the more challenging course of responsibility. So what I urge you to do is remember that bitter taste of regret for the great opportunities you didn't take up, and use that to not have that kind of same thinking or miss that opportunity the next time. I trust that the education that you're receiving at Wabash, in the very broadest sense of your education, is honing your principles and values, developing your capabilities and competence. While, of course, other colleges and their very specialized courses of studies serves as a training ground for a training for particular jobs that may provide what at least appears to be a very clear future career map, I know your Wabash education is more valuable. Your Wabash education will serve you well as a compass, not a map, and it will guide you wherever you are, to and from, back and forth to true north. So I thank you very much for this invitation, for your attention this morning. It's been my great privilege to be here with all of you. Thank you.